Okay, good morning, everyone. We are on page 95 of our booklet, or thereabouts. Addendum number 12, article number 5, the hiddenness of God. We're doing this as a aspect of our study on the providence of God. And here's a little, yes. It is a term that is part of theology. I don't know who, theology / philosophy. I didn't invent it. Yeah, I don't. The whole idea is that God is not apparent. Yeah. And what's interesting and perhaps providential in this way is we're studying the hiddenness of God and the providence of God. And for those of you that know, for those of you that do not know, in February, if everything follows through, I'm scheduled to have a debate with an atheist in San Antonio, Texas. Yes, Janet? It's a Middle English word. So you should have learned it in middle school when you were taking English. And I'm your teacher, yeah. But I'm not your English teacher. Aren't you thankful for that, Alan? I'm surprised he didn't say amen. And it's interesting as I prepare for this debate, and I'm working very hard not to have my classes and my sermons infiltrated by all of the studying I'm doing for that debate, because I'm already ruining Janet's mind by talking to her about all these things. And there are two types of atheists, as the guy I'm going to have discussion with divides them into your agnostic atheist and your Gnostic atheist. And your agnostic atheist says, I cannot prove that God exists. Your agnostic atheist or Gnostic atheist says, I can prove that God exists. And behold, one of the reasons why they use, one of the arguments against the existence of God is, guess what? The hiddenness of God. And that is one of the top 4 arguments that I have discovered. You have your supposed lack of evidence, inconsistency in revelations, the problem of evil, and the hiddenness of God. So I'm preparing for it, and here it is, and that was not part of my plan at all. The hiddenness of God basically is, where is God in the midst of suffering? Or in reference to more of those that are dealing from the perspective of where I'll be headed in February, where is God to the sincere seeker? Where is God who wants to find him but cannot find a reason to believe? And I'm not going to claim that every single one of us have had the same journey. Some people are more childlike in their faith, and I do not mean that in a demeaning way, because what did Jesus say? We need to have the faith as a child, right? So I don't mean that in a demeaning way at all. And some of us have more of a challenged journey, and some people can accept things far more easily than others. Some people are curious and go into rabbit holes sometimes, and sometimes they never get out of it. But the question is then, I want to believe in God, but I don't see any evidence for him. Or I want to believe in God, but there's suffering that's going on. And although right after I moved here, we spent an entire quarter on pain and suffering, and some of you still might be suffering pain from that entire quarter, it is a serious topic for not only unbelievers, but also believers. And God, throughout his providence in providing, he provides answers, he provides insight, he provides sometimes questions for us to seek. Sometimes he provides people to come into our lives to try to find God in all of the minutiae. And sometimes we're just so busy, I think, that we don't see God. And I think sometimes there's just so many things in the way. We're so busy, we don't have time, or we are just so overwhelmed that we're not seeing what we need to see. But the idea of a sincere seeker, is there any example in the Bible where God provided for sincere seekers to learn the truth?
Okay, what did both John and Johnny? Okay, Ethiopian eunuch. Cornelius. Two very prominent ones. Now, in both of those cases, was there something miraculously provided? Yes.
But in both of those cases, how did Cornelius and how did the eunuch learn of the gospel? Yeah, from another human. God provided people. And so yes, Bruce. I don't know. That's a good question. I do believe that Paul was sincere because he claims that everything I'm doing, and I did with a clear conscience. I don't know if he was searching, although there is this hint. God or Jesus in the vision asked him a question. What question did he ask him? Okay, why are you persecuting me? And what else did he ask him? Why did he kick against the goads or the pricks? Okay, now what is a goad? Yeah, when I was a worthless farmhand helping my grandpa and getting paid $1 an hour, which was, as I usually say, $2 an hour more than what I was worth. You know, he had pigs and he had, cows, and we would use goads, but we didn't call them goads. Okay, anybody here? What did you use to poke the pigs and the cows on your farms? Or tobacco sticks. Except for my grandpa, he didn't call them a tobacco stick. Any guess what he called them? A backer stick. That's absolutely right. He called a backer stick. And you get that backer stick, and you would hit the back of that pig, and on the first time you hit that back of the pig always went where it should, right? No. In fact, you sometimes have to break the backer stick because you hit the pig so hard to get it to go where you wanted it to. Yeah, you did. At least I did. Maybe I just hit the pig too hard, but you poke it, you hit it. Well, I was just too strong. I like John's interpretation. I was just too strong at 11 years old. I was stronger than a pig. But you keep kicking against the goats. What does that suggest? He was being stubborn. So was God trying to get Paul's attention before the vision on the road to Damascus then? I would too. Can you think of a place where he might have been trying to get his attention, but Paul kicked against the goat? Stephen. That's the only other example we have. And he just happened to be there. Providence. God was trying to get his attention. And so sometimes God appears hidden, but he's actually trying to get our attention, but we are kicking against the goats. So how sincere are we in our desire to learn of God's awareness in our lives? Jeremiah talks about how the heart is what above all? You remember? Deceitful above all. And of course, this is the heart of a sinner, not that we're born with, but one that we inherit from our own activities, our own lives, our own thoughts, our own actions. But Jeremiah and other places also talk about how we need to have a heart from God. Ezekiel has this paradoxical truth in that it states in various places that God put into people a new heart, but it also says people put in themselves a new heart. And you got that same paradox with Pharaoh. Pharaoh hardened his own heart, and yet the text says that God hardened Pharaoh's heart. So some people go through periods of doubt. Some people don't go through periods of doubt. Some people ask the question, where are you, God? And some people don't ask that question because, and again, I don't mean this in a demeaning way, they have the faith of a child. And there have been times that I have wished I had more of a childlike faith. I am who I am. And I wish I could accept things sometimes more easily. Yes, Janet?
Anybody else? Okay, when you look at that first sentence, every thinking person has at some point raised the question, where is God in the midst of suffering? Or again, where is evidence that God exists? And when we can combine these two questions, where is there evidence that God exists and where is God in times of suffering, we can find the kernel of the gospel.
If you were to define the bare basics of the gospel, it would be what? If you were to define the bare basics of the gospel, what would it be?
What? Okay, God is love.
Death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus.
Okay, you find that in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, where Paul wrote, I delivered to you of what importance?
First importance. That Jesus died according to the Scriptures, was buried, and then was resurrected according to the Scriptures. So where is God in reference to the gospel of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ? Well, where is God when we are suffering? That's the death of Jesus Christ. Where is evidence that there is a God? That's the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And so the gospel itself answers both of those questions. Now, a lot of people have a hard time accepting the resurrection because it is a miracle, and they have this is part of the dilemma, they have a presupposition that miracles cannot happen, so prove to me that there is a God without using miracles. Well, it makes it a little bit more difficult since God is outside of our five senses. But when we try to look for more evidence of where God is, I came up with 5 possible answers, and then we'll go through the material. Faith has some evidence, but not all evidence. Everybody turn to Hebrews chapter 11. And I'm going to show you probably something you've heard before, maybe 2 things you've heard before. One of them is wrong, one of them is right. In Hebrews chapter 11, you will find people say, as they read verse 1, now faith is a reality of what is hoped for, the proof of what is not seen. Somebody got the Old King James? Because that's usually the one that people quote. Sherilyn? Old King James. Okay. A lot of people take that, they say, faith is the absence of evidence. That is not what that verse is teaching. This verse is teaching you can have faith in something you don't see because you have faith in something you do see. That's all through Hebrews chapter 11. In fact, you say, by faith we understand that the universe was created. What do you not see? You don't see the universe created. What do you see? The created universe. That's right. So, possible answers as to why people, they're looking for God's providence in their life. And they say, I don't see it. One answer is, faith has some evidence, but not all evidence. I was dealing with this one agnostic that I was trying to convert. And he said, how much faith do I need to have before I can say I believe? So how would you answer that? How much faith do I need to have before I can say I believe? Because what he was saying is, I've still got questions. And God put us together, providence. Remember, Cornelius and the Ethiopian eunuch. Not miraculous means, but people means. Go ahead, Frank. Absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody think of another answer? That was not wrong. I'm just looking for more feedback. Okay. If you have belief, then you have. Yeah. Okay. If he's, even if it's an ounce, did Jesus say anything about it? If you have the faith of a what? Mustard seed? The answer I gave him was 51%. I said, can you say with 51% certainty that you believe? He said, I can handle that. And I ended up baptizing him soon after that. That might not be the only answer, might not be the best answer, but it's the answer that worked for him. And through God's providence, we came together. So when we're looking for God's actions in our lives, whether because we're Christians and we're suffering, or whether somebody is not a Christian and they're searching, one possible answer is faith has some evidence, but not all evidence. But faith is not based upon the lack of evidence. Faith is based upon evidence and then taking that evidence and then making conclusions from that. Everybody understand the difference between those two uses of Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1? It's an important distinction. In fact, I just saw that other one on YouTube this morning, or maybe in the middle of the night, because you know my schedule. And that is, the reason why we don't believe is Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 says that faith is believing without evidence. Nope, not at all. Another reason is free choice includes the heart. Let me ask you this question. Have you ever not believed a truth because you didn't want to? Have you ever not believed a truth because you did not want to? Mm-hmm. Now, the first time somebody tells you something that's true, do you always accept it the first time? No. Why don't you? If it's true, why don't you accept it the first time? Okay. Okay. You're waiting for evidence, right? And sometimes the evidence comes in corroboration from another. Okay. Why else don't you accept something true the first time you hear it? Why do you
Not always
accept something
that's true the very first time you hear it. Okay? Sometimes you just don't comprehend it. Okay, so you need to think through it. Janet? Okay. Put you at odds with your family. Why else?
such as?
Opposite of what that truth is. So you resist.
Okay. So you have sometimes
It's a bias, and sometimes it goes even further than that. It's a prejudice against something, that you're making a decision before you ever even get the evidence. And sometimes the bias is also in play. Any other reasons why people don't accept a truth, even though it's true? Okay, sometimes it does. Sounds too good to be true. Anybody else?
what are the possible reasons why?
Some truths can't be proven. We accept them on the basis of what's most reasonable.
Okay.
And sometimes it takes time to think through what is most reasonable.
The level of truth in a court.
The defense gets up there and says, he's innocent. The whole jury says, okay, let's go home. No. Why else do we not always accept truth the first time we hear it? You know, all those are true, and I think another one that maybe is the hardest to accept, we don't want to accept it. And let's just use an example. Somebody comes up to somebody else and says, your husband or your wife is cheating on you. Is your first inclination to say, I believe it? Not generally. No. Your hand raised, Nancy? Okay. Oh, scratch your head. Put a little bit higher and I'll call on you. No, we don't want to believe it. And there are some truths that are not comfortable. There was a friend of mine that was studying with somebody else, and they taught them everything, the 5 steps you have to go through. Hear, believe, repent, confess, to be baptized. She knew everything. She still wouldn't do anything. And so he says, why won't you be baptized? I say, here are the 5 steps. You study them. You believe them. She took that piece of paper and circled one of them and said, that's why. Which one do you think that she circled? Yeah, it was the repent one. Yeah, sometimes if they don't agree with baptism or they're not sure they believe, but I don't want to repent. She was very honest.
And she spent the whole time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So sometimes we just don't want to believe. So it goes back to somebody says, I am a sincere seeker, or I am a non-resistant non-believer. I want to believe, show me the evidence. Show me through God's providence he exists, or show me some argument that God exists. And here's the question that is hard for anybody to answer. How sincere are you? That's a hard one to really, because you have to do some sincere heart searching for that. Alan.
Aspects of it. We talked about Saul of Tarsus earlier. I think Saul of Tarsus very likely was sincerely seeking the Messiah. to be the Messiah. That's what you resisted.
Not only that Jesus was the Messiah, and that would be a different answer for what Israel was expecting, but did he have to give up a lot because there's a different kind of Messiah? The third reason as to why people say God is
hidden is, and I like the way that the one guy put it, God is not a stalker. Stalker. God is not a stalker. God gives evidence, but he's not going to coerce anybody. He's not going to continually follow you around. Will he give you possibilities? Well, he did. He gave possibilities to Cornelius, Ethiopian eunuch, to Saul/Paul. But God is not a stalker. In other words, if you're not interested, you're not interested. Yeah, Thomas, he was seeking more evidence. I've got to write a sermon on doubt soon because Michael Picard is working on a sermon on doubt soon. And he wants me to write a sermon on doubt soon so he can work on a sermon on doubt soon. So we've been helping each other out on it. And one of the points is while doubt is sometimes denounced by Jesus, you have little faith. Why did you doubt? Doubt is also an opportunity to look for more evidence. And that's exactly what Thomas was doing. Yes.
Talking about not a stalker, that's common with God from the very start. When Cain offered the offering, and he was all mad because God didn't accept it. God counseled him.
Yeah,
And he left it up to Cain.
very much so.
And Cain, of course, went off the rails very bad.
If you do what is right, hold your countenance or hold your face be lifted.
Very much so. Very good point. Another reason why God appears hidden is who is in charge, God or us? God is. So when we say God is hidden and he's not answering our prayers, or where is he when we're suffering, or I don't see evidence for God, God, give me evidence, who's now trying to be in charge? We're trying to be in charge. And God has given evidence. The clearest evidence for the existence of God is Jesus Christ himself. The clearest evidence for where God is in suffering is Jesus Christ himself. And the fifth point we'll maybe go over another time. Well, let's go back to this idea of the sincere seeker. Everybody turn to Genesis chapter 3. Y'all know my love for the first 3 chapters in Genesis. I have thought about one day, but I never will have time to write an entire book on all the references in Genesis 4 through Revelation 22 that go back to Genesis 1, 2, and 3. And it would be a tremendous amount. Okay, so we've got in Genesis chapter 3, but we're going back up for a second. Well, no, we can do it all from here, I guess. Now the serpent was the most cunning of all the wild animals that the Lord had made. He said to the woman, did God really say, you can't eat from any tree in the garden? The woman said to the serpent, we may eat the fruit from the trees in the garden, but about the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden, God said, you must not eat it or touch it, or you will die. No, you will not die, the serpent said to the woman. In fact, God knows that when you eat it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. How much evidence did the serpent / Satan give for his proposition? None whatsoever. Don't know if you ever thought about that. He gave no evidence whatsoever. He made himself an equal standard. Correct. Good point. But he gave no evidence whatsoever. So why did Eve and Adam, but we're focused on Eve right now, why did she decide to sin? Yeah, she wanted it. She wanted something that she did not have, and that was to be like God in a way that was not yet hers, or not to be hers. Yes. You.
When serpent lied to her, he did not lie to her. He said, you'll not surely die, meaning a different death. And he said, you will get this knowledge, yeah, you'll get the knowledge. She didn't know what evil was at that time.
He deceived her. He didn't lie, but he deceived her.
We know that she was deceived in 1 Timothy chapter 2. How much evidence did Eve have
For God's existence. How much evidence did Eve have that God was good? In fact, I don't know if you've ever noticed this. We look at the temptation of Eve, and we divide it into the three stratums of 1 John chapter 2. And that is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life. Do you ever notice that the serpent does not tempt Eve with all three of those temptations? He only tempts her with one, the pride of life. Who tempts her that it looks good and would be good to eat? She tempted herself. That's right. So all three temptations are present, but the serpent only presented one, then she presented the other two that go along with eating that which was forbidden. Did y'all ever hear the illustration of the flood? And it got so high, people were told to evacuate, and many people didn't. And the floodwaters just kept rising and rising and rising, and finally people were sitting on the rooftops. And this might be an illustration, but it's also sadly true. You remember, was it Katrina in New Orleans? And you had people on roofs waiting to be rescued. And, the illustration goes by that, boat rode by and said, Gideon said, no, I'm waiting on God to rescue me. And then the boat went by and a helicopter lowered a rope, a ladder, and said, climb up. He said, no, I'm waiting on God to rescue me. The waters kept on rising. The person died, went to heaven, and said, God, why didn't you rescue me? And he said, what? I said, a boat, and I said, a helicopter. Sometimes we are looking for answers that God is not going to give, and we don't see answers that God is giving to us.
The only way God works is through miracles, and that is just not so.
Yeah. In fact, would you say that the Bible is filled with more providential, miraculous providence? Now we discuss whether you should use the word miraculous because that's a part
With me, miraculous providence or non-miraculous providence? The Bible is filled more with non-miraculous providence. It really is. Now, if you read anybody got any questions, comments, or feel free to talk. I'm losing my voice again. Y'all just want me to lose my voice, don't you?
God's working
Colossians chapter 1. Okay, we have him being the firstborn of or over all creation, verse 15. For everything was created by him in heaven and on earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. So you have dual reality. You have the reality that is physical. You have the reality that is spiritual. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and by him all things hold together. Now, whether that is by a decree at the beginning, such as in Genesis chapter 1, there are decrees, let each kind produce after its own kind. Or whether this is something that is ongoing would be an interesting discussion, but either way, the sun rises because of who? Because of God, because of Jesus. That's evidence. And it's providential evidence. I've got my fingers crossed, Frank, so I won't forget what I'm going to say, so you could go so you won't forget what you're going to say. I don't know.
We have to understand is that soul seeking has to do with people whose heart is right and are willing to comply with what God says in the Bible. You know, Romans 12. We in the earlier part there, present your body a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is reasonable service. That's a change of heart that leads to a change or change of mind that leads to a change of direction. But also in Romans 15, in verse 4, whatsoever things are written aforetime are written for our learning. So we have to do the deep dive into God's Word to essentially rebrand ourselves, our psyche, our everything, to please God. And when people aren't willing to buy that, let's call them reprobate and go on and forget it. And go find somebody else like selling vacuum cleaners. Pardon me, I'm not minimizing the gospel, but we have to quit dwelling on failures and keep pressing on and looking for somebody with a heart that wants to learn what God would have them to do and willing to make a change.
The biblical equivalent to your illustration of, or analogy of selling vacuum cleaners is shake the dust off the sandals of your feet. Now, does that mean that you never go back to that person? No. Can God's providence cause them to be at a different place in life to where now they are willing to change, or they're willing to listen to evidence, or so on and so forth? Yes. Prayer is powerful. Yes, Frank. I've got two fingers crossed.
I remember when Daddy died, we was at the funeral home, and one of the neighbors down the road who would come to services once in a while, just once in a while, stood over his casket and said, and I don't know that she professed to be a Christian necessarily, but she said, or stood over his casket and said, Brother Fox, thank you for making me aware of Jesus Christ. You know, that's wonderful to hear. But my point is, we don't know why the housewife won't buy a vacuum cleaner is because, you know, that's her thing. But you don't know that she doesn't go to bed and think about it every night. And we've got to believe that.
I'm going to give you, we've got 4 minutes left, and instead of me trying to fit this all in, for Wednesday night, I'm going to give you an assignment that's not in the book, and that is, we talked about how the sunrise is, providential evidence of God's existence. We looked at Hebrews chapter 11. So your assignment for Wednesday is find some biblical verses that show how nature is used as evidence for God's existence. Now, you could do this in two tiers. One, biblical evidence, or two, if you wanted to delve into another area such as things that are often considered natural disasters often have benefits to them. For example, volcanoes. Okay? Is there any positive aspect to a volcano erupting? Yeah, there is. So either find natural examples that show that what we consider as natural disasters can actually be God's productive creation, or find Bible verses that talk about how God is using nature, or nature itself is used as examples of his existence.
Let's see. Asking a preacher to be concise. That would take the province of God. Finding the biblical examples or natural examples
Of how nature shows God's existence. Was that concise enough? Okay. Yeah. Now, if you read The Hiddenness of God, it was written during a particular catastrophe. Does anybody remember, if you read it, what the 9/11? Yeah. And were there people that survived 9/11? Were there people who died in 9/11? Yeah. Can we, with rigorous certainty, say why some people lived and why some people died? No, we cannot. But people would ask, where is God in that? And I don't know what it was like here after 9/11. Did y'all have any visitors to church at any of the churches that you went to the Sunday after 9/11? We did down in Florida. Okay, so that's the written background of that. Thank you very much.